Hi, everyone. It's Barb Egan with Therapy Talks. And on today's show, we have a therapist on from South Carolina. Blake Blankenbecler is a psychodynamic therapist specializing in anxiety, trauma, and eating disorders. So, on today's show, we talk about dealing with trauma, grief, and anxiety in a family dynamic using unique tools to combat preverbal trauma. So, I hope you join us. So, what do you work in as a therapist?
I would say I like specialize in trauma, eating disorders, and anxiety, and then I just like smashed it all together of just like humans,
Yeah.
because, we all are in that space. But yeah, I think I found from working literally all over the country, we're really similar. It's just the
Mhm.
language that we use to describe our experiences is going to be a touch different. So even things like being back in the Bible Belt, there's
Mhm.
like different language and vocabulary used versus that's
Yeah.
not going to be used a whole lot out in LA.
Right.
So yes, wide range, but lots of
Yeah.
similarities.
Yeah. I feel like everyone that comes on this show, probably in the
Uh-huh.
last month or two, especially, has all been trauma and eating disorders. And everybody works in anxiety. I mean, that is by
Yes.
far the most like prevalent thing that we all see. But it's fascinating. It means that there is such a need and such a strong pool for people coming and getting help, which is awesome.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think it's just so great to see people really showing up and like wanting to do this and dig in and not only heal themselves, but heal like generations of
Mhm.
trauma and so
Right.
it's a lot of, I mean, there's so much grief that's a part of trauma to look through and be like, and just explore the things you didn't get. But it's profound work.
So tell us a little bit more about that, of how the grief piece is just another part of that puzzle work of anxiety, body image, eating disorders and trauma.
I think growing up, you're doing so much protecting and surviving. And so I think I've shared, I've even like where I have started doing a lot of things around friendships. And so a
Mm.
grief piece that I see often is this sense of like, I was so young and my family life looked so different. Like, this is just an example of family life of, having parents who have mental health illnesses, or there's addiction in the home, or there's just a lot of complex trauma. Like, you're not getting to focus on like, I want to go hang out with my gal pals and learn how to be a great
Yeah.
friend. And so there's this sense of like coming out of college and into your 20s and being like, I missed out on so many things
Wow.
because I was busy like surviving and
Right.
navigating my family system and deep in the throes of like people pleasing, or even using your eating, like using an eating disorder to cope. So there's just a lot of like, and even just relearning, like, how do I do these things? How do I play? How do I enjoy? How do
Mm.
I trust people?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Just being in survival mode for so long and then finally being in a spot, often in those 20s or that coming of age type story of, okay, who am I? How do I relearn some of these things that I actually didn't get a
Yeah.
chance to learn in my family of origin as a child? What
Mhm.
are some examples that you often work in and walk with people through?
I tend to work with a lot of folks whose parents are somewhere, and again, I don't want to like throw out personality disorders, but I do think like and even I like to normalize it, like we're all on a spectrum. And
Mhm.
it seems that a lot of the people that are coming to therapy have parents who are somewhere on like the borderline ilk or the
Okay.
narcissistic ilk.
Mm.
And so, for example, let's say a lot of things is like it had to stay all about mom.
Right.
Like, there was no space for differentiation, for really understanding like, this is what I like, this is
Yeah.
who I am. Like, there is competitiveness even in a like really sad way. the mom's own trauma. Like a lot of times we look at it, like a lot of folks will be like, it was like my mom was like, I was the parent and
Right.
my mom was the child. So much parentification. And so you grow up and you're like this uber adult where it's like these, people are in their 20s, 30s, and you would just, based on how incredibly succinct they have their lives together, you would think they were in their 50s. So it's even like learning how to like be just your own age, like just learn how to learning how to have fun and play is some really, paradoxically, it's some very hard work.
Yeah. Because as you're describing that, it's almost like our culture would glorify that too, of wow, you have all your stuff together. You're only this age and you've achieved this status or this far, like we're very achievement oriented. So what does that look like? Like that would be really difficult for someone because I could imagine they don't come to therapy to say, hey, I have my stuff together on the outside. Help me play a little more. I mean, maybe some people
No.
want more work-life balance, but like what does that actually look like?
I mean, it looks like even letting yourself play in session. Like it's about letting, even just getting comfortable with the word mess. I even do sand tray therapy.
Okay.
So I literally have a
With
sand
adults.
tray. Yeah, I literally
Wow.
only do it with adults, which is
Wow.
incredible. I was trained to do it with kids, but I found that it's actually, I don't love working with, I love kids, but I don't
Yeah.
love working with the kiddos.
Yeah.
Um, and I find, especially for trauma work, it's some of the most incredible things. And so
Wow.
there's this experience of like, words are to toys as language is to play. And so there's something about, we use these like little miniatures and folks can put them in the sand. And I basically just start with the prompt of like, show me what it's like to be you, or show me this part of you, show me your eating disorder, show me all of these things. And you just get to play, because a lot of our traumatic experiences are preverbal or
Right.
are the language capacities offline, like our Broca's area is offline. And so it's just this beautiful, like really incredible way to kind of process through a lot of that and just learn to like, is there any movement? Like, can we move anything around? And just even like bringing a more lighthearted, less serious approach. Yeah, of just, and that's certainly something that takes time just to create trust, to be like, whoa, we're doing this thing that looks really silly, but it's actually quite deep and profound.
Yeah. Oh, I love that. That's really neat.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
So do you work primarily then? What is the demographic you'd say that you work in mostly?
I would say mostly it's like 20s to 40s.
Mhm.
But then I also, and I work with men and women. So I think, yeah, I just really love when men come to therapy. I think it's incredible to themselves. It's incredible for kind of disrupting the patriarchy and unlearning some really toxic masculinity. So yeah, so like 20s to 40s, but then, they're younger people in college, and then there are a little older people. So it's all across the map.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think just people who kind of are at like a precipice of like, oh, realizing the cost of staying the same is now like greater than the cost of changing and
Right.
navigating that.
Right. Wow.
Yeah.
So what does your trauma work look like? What are your approaches? How do you treat trauma?
Yeah. So I use a few different things. I do a lot of somatic work. So even just helping folks get back in their body, especially with eating disorders too. It's this like, when I think about eating disorders and even something like anorexia, or it's all about like, how do I kill off these parts of myself? How do I kill off my hunger cues? And so really coming back and slowing down and noticing like what's happening inside of your body. How do we even start going to the bathroom when you need to go to the bathroom? Like just
Yeah.
listening to even those urges that seem really simple, but actually if you start paying attention to it, it's like, oh my gosh, I get so annoyed when I have to go to the bathroom. Like I try and disregard it completely and push it to the limits. Um, and then I also do a lot of EMDR work. So
Okay.
just to help people, you know, process those process those memories. And something that I say a lot too is this sense of like, certainly are the memories that we process in EMDR, like, can they be really intense and I don't know. It just feels like there needs to be a lot of drama around them, but often it's like these really simple things, like the things that happen on the playground, an experience at school, something that happened at the dinner table that just like, it's like these ordinary moments, but that they like something happened in them that really stung and changed like the trajectory.
Right.
So,
And so how do
yeah.
you kind of tease those out or process through those?
The like ordinary moments,
Yeah.
I think it's just asking and getting curious. Like when people use really broad stroke themes, it's just getting curious, like, well, what that look like? Like, give me an example. Tell me a story. So it's a lot of, I love this idea of like these little stories, these micro stories tell macro stories.
Yeah.
So it's just getting curious, like even asking like, what happened at the dinner table? Like, did anyone ask you questions? Or like when you got up or when you got home from school, like who was there? What happened? Who gave you a big hug?
Yeah.
And just even seeing what happened and what didn't happen.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of narrative work. I love that. Yeah.
Yes.
We do
Yes.
very well with stories as humans. We're so gripped by them, and everybody has a story. And
Everybody.
there's lots of parts of, I love that. Like the micro stories tell a lot of the macro story too.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So for our listeners, a lot of them are going to hear of EMDR. It's so trendy, but for those who haven't, can you explain what EMDR is and why it's so effective in trauma work?
Yeah, so EMDR is called, or it stands for eye movement desensitization and reprocessing. I like to call, I don't know if this is a good thing or a bad thing, but I like to call it brain surgery without the blood. So it's literally changing neural pathways. So it's this experience of like whenever you get in a fight with, say, your partner about the dishes, it's not actually like it's never about the dishes. It's about like what the dishes represent, or it's about something that got triggered long ago. So it's EMDR is looking at what's the thing that's getting triggered and how do we go back to that specific memory that might be brought up of like feeling unlovable or not important, or like you have to do it all by yourself, and going back to those memories around that theme and processing through with you can use like bilateral stimulation. Like I usually have clients put headphones in their ears and it beeps on either side, and we process through those memories. And then it's also not just going through these incredibly traumatic memories, it's also inviting in care and resources. And it's pretty creative. Like we bring in like wise characters and nurturing characters and protective characters to even give those memories and those experiences, give you like what you needed that you didn't have. And so it's certainly not work that happens overnight, but it's this really beautiful way of like letting your body naturally heal. Like a cut naturally heals, but trauma we know gets stuck in the body. And so it just like a lot of times there's shaking, or like we move our bodies during it, just to help even like release and remind your body and your nervous system, like I can move now, I'm not stuck, I have options.
That's so beautiful. So those parts that you're talking about, do you utilize IFS as well?
I do some. Yes, I do really love just this idea of not traditionally, but even just using parts language. I find it's really helpful to get, so it's not this like it's not all you. It's like we have different parts, like, and it's a lot less scary to explore you being a judgmental person versus this judgmental part that sometimes shows up.
Right. Yes, absolutely. And the
Because we
purpose
all
that it
have them.
served, how it first came to be, how it served a purpose that maybe it no longer serves such a forefront purpose. But that's so true. That you're not a judgmental person, but you have a judgmental part.
Yeah. And we all do. It's so
Of
human. So
course.
I think
Yeah,
it's
we're
so
human.
normalizing of like, there's parts that really want to change and there's parts that don't want to change. Like, welcome to
Mhm.
the paradox of being human.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's just letting kind of all of these pieces and places have voices that might not, and just even exploring like when that's happening, like what might be needed, what might be the
Mhm.
thing that it's trying to protect. So you can get a lot further, yeah, and a lot more curious when it's a part versus the whole
Mhm.
you.
Oh, I love that. Yeah, it's way less
Yeah,
intimidating or labeling on ourselves because we can be so hard on ourselves and critical.
so hard.
And that one part, it's more like looking at this mag. It's like, okay, I can look at it, it can be objective and I can turn it around and feel it, but it doesn't all consume me. It's just this one objective part if I can kind of separate it from my
Yeah.
worth. I love that. Oh,
Hmm.
that's really good.
Hmm.
So, how
Yes.
do you know which type of trauma approach, like whether it's sand work or EMDR or somatic work or a little bit of everything, to use with a client? Like, if someone's listening to this and they're like, wow, what you're saying really does resonate with me, I wonder which approach would work well with me. And I know it has to do with rapport and all of that, but what are some of your go to signs to say, okay, this is where I would enact EMDR or sand work?
I find so I rarely start with like going straight into EMDR. Like,
Right.
I like to slow things down. Welcome to therapy. Let's go. Like, we don't want to re-traumatize people. So
Right,
I
right.
think I use Sandtray. I haven't gotten to use it for the past 2 years because of COVID. So it's been fun to
Oh,
like be back in person and use it
yeah.
with folks. But it's a lot of, if people don't feel like they have a lot of language to talk about what's happening on their insides or to explain, it's like, oh my gosh, it's right here, but I don't have the words for it.
Right.
That's really when I use like, hey, would you, and I'll name, like, it's a little awkward. We're gonna sit on the floor, we're gonna play in sand. Like, it sounds elementary, but I promise, like, you be distrustful, but I promise it'll do something. And
Right.
that's where we get to use these little miniatures,
Mm,
and just explore. And that even helps of like, oh, helps find the relationship to certain parts and what's even happening, and just the visual and it being outside of you versus like inside of you.
right. Right.
And then the body stuff even just happen. I feel like that happens all throughout. Like that, those are things that I'm really wanting to notice all the time, because I think there's so much rich wisdom. So certainly we start slow, or I'll even start just noticing my body. For,
Mm,
folks who have eating disorders, there might be a lot of body phobia. So it's like,
yeah.
I just want to stay out. And so I'll even notice like, oh, so much sadness just showed up in my chest.
Wow.
Like, or like, oh my gosh, I feel that anxiety with you. Like, there's a
Yeah.
lot happening here. Your body's letting me know what it's like to be you right now. And that
Wow.
sometimes
Yeah.
is a great simple way to just even introduce
Mm,
um what's happening. And so yeah, it's a process. I wish that there was like a linear way, but just like healing, it's not linear. And so
right.
we bring in
Yeah.
certain things at different times.
Mm,
And sometimes we do like a month or two of EMDR, and then
mm,
it's more time to like process it. And so it's like, I mean, I love living by the beach because it's like you get to see the tide come in and out. And so
yeah.
there's a lot of movement of in and out and in and out and in
Right.
and out.
Yeah. That rhythm.
Yeah, so much rhythm.
Mm, I love that. So when
Yeah.
people are hearing this and they're thinking, okay, sand work, they may have heard that for kids, but for an adult, like
Yeah.
what would be an example of how a scenario could play out to kind of paint a tangible picture?
Like when I would use a sand tray, or
Yeah,
like what
just
it
like
would
an
look like.
example of maybe of, a time that you've used it and there was like an aha moment or there was a realization of, oh wow, this blank part of me, really came to the forefront here, or whatever you're processing really showed up. Like if there's an example that you can show the effectiveness of it.
Oh gosh. Let me think. So a lot of times I use really vague prompts just to kind of see where our unconscious wants to go and our psyche wants to go. So it's even like, show me what it's like being you,
Mhm.
or show me. this people pleasing part. We do a lot, like I work with a lot of folks who, might have like spiritual abuse or sexual abuse. And so it's even like, show me what that feels like in your body. Like, where does it live? And so it's using these, like miniatures. Like they're literally the most random things. Like they're trees and books, and just imagine on like the tiniest scale, like that you'd find in a dollhouse, and even smaller, just little animals. Like, what do snakes represent? Like sometimes snakes represent kind of the bad parts of us, or it feels like the parts that kind of circle around us. And I have a lot of fences, so often people will use fences to like name the block. And so what happens is during this experience is just even asking really curious questions. Like so I'm saying it's like to help people realize like it's literally a miniature of a snake. During the session, I'll never say like, oh, what's the snake doing there? I'll just say like, what's that? To really give a person autonomy and agency to name exactly what it is. Because I might see it as one thing, but it's for them to name and for them to really have an experience of like, no, this is my reality that I'm putting out. And so I find there's like a great deal of sacredness to it. So I don't touch anything. I just point. Like it is literally, it feels like their insides are on the outside. Cool. And it's just even seeing like, can we add anything in? Can we take anything away? Like even adding in resources. How do we add in kindness? How do we add in compassion? And so I don't have like a specific example.
Oh, that's beautiful. No, it's
but
good. That was good. Yeah. Thank you. And wow, that's really neat. Do ever you have an adult when you suggest that be reluctant, or are they kind of open and say, hey, I trust you? Yeah.
Of course. It's like, wait, Blake, what are you doing? Like, this is bananas. And I'm like, it totally is. You can tell me you hate it the whole time, but I've never had it happen. It's, if anything, what happens is like, they get to be really distrustful. And I love when clients are like, what the heck are we doing? But something always comes up, and there's just, it's so helpful to just like, and even not have to talk as much and just get to use your hands. Like you really get to just drop into a space, a different kind of a space.
Oh, I love that. That's so awesome. And so for eating disorders, now if we kind of shift gears there and focus on that a bit, what does that work look like in your practice?
Oh gosh, it's hard work because eating disorders they're just like insidious. It's almost like they leave splinters in so many places. But I really look at the symbolism of things. So, for example, I shared earlier, when I think of someone struggling with restricting, a lot of things I'm going to be curious about is like, how do they not let in care? What do they even do with the care that I offer them? Do they spit it out? Do they not let themselves have it? Do they push it away? And we get really curious even in the room together, like, what's happening? I just like offered you care. Like, did you put it in your mouth? Did you let yourself taste it? So even just looking at like metaphorical food, and just and exploring like how even we were fed as kids, like what did care look like? What did nurturing look like? Why is it important to not be hungry and to not need? And to really care for those parts. So it's a lot of, caring for our little younger selves. And then, thinking of like binging, what is it about like taking in and taking in and taking in and not, and feeling like in a way taking in gives me edges. Like I can feel myself once I've kind of disconnected from myself in a different way. What does enough feel like? What's too much feel like? What feels bad about stopping? So it's and then it's just looking at how do I slow myself down? How do I get back into my window of tolerance to even like taste food differently? Like I often say, I got I think we've been married almost 5 years, and I do not cook. I am not a good cook. I do not enjoy cooking. My husband really does. And so I'm this, like, when I have to make dinner, I kind of throw things in the oven and it's like as quick as possible. And it's not a fun experience. And my husband really loves taking his time and savoring. And it's like even learning, like, food made with love tastes a lot different. Like, you can even taste what food with care is like. And so even just how do we slow ourselves down to take in, because a lot of people who struggle with disordered eating, it's, it's on a spectrum. And I'm thinking about diet culture and just growing up, a lot of folks have grown up in 90s, 2000s, like super, super toxic, world around that. And so it's just even unlearning, like, how can I be embodied? How can I come back to my body and honor it instead of just trying to change it or get rid of it?
Yeah. Parts of that culture can be really toxic. Parts can be great, but it's trying to identify that. Yeah. And so when you're working in eating disorders or disordered eating, what does that process look like? When someone comes to you, how do you uncover that that's what's going on? Or do they sometimes say, hey, this is what I'm struggling with, of binging and purging, restricting, body image, body dysmorphia, both?
I think it's a little bit of both. Sometimes things get so normalized. So even I think about when people start sharing about, like, oh, this is just what home looks like. Like, my dad did this, my mom did this, like, da da da. And it's like, whoa. Like, that's not okay. And it's like, no, it's fine. It's normal. Like, that's what happened. So even that shows up with eating disorders.
It wasn't that bad. Yeah.
Exactly.
Justifying.
And so even that shows up of, like, and again, I don't want to make it out. There's never a sense of, like, trying to trick, or just, it's more of a curiosity of, like, oh, how's that show up in your relationship with food? Like, oh, I have a fine relationship with food. I eat between the, like, I only let myself eat this stuff. I don't let myself do this. I don't go out to eat at certain, and it's like, oh, but that's it's so normalized and it's happened for so long. And even we look at the folks, like, their own relationship with their mom, or their mom's relationship with food. And it's like, this is all very normal. So it's not crazy to be like, or they're like, no, that's not what I struggle. Like, I struggle with anxiety. I'm fine with food. So even just looking, and sometimes people have a knowing around it, and knowing takes a long time to, even, like, with anything, to admit and to say, like, oh, I do have a problem with this. Like, I really actually struggle with this and I need help. Like, that's sometimes even part of it, is just allowing yourself to name what's happening.
Yeah, that's so hard to do and so brave.
Yes, so brave. So brave.
So then how do you walk with someone through that? Let's say you get to an aha moment. Maybe they come in for anxiety. You realize that there's some correlation with eating or how they view themselves, some of these generational patterns too, maybe traumas in there as well. What do you do? Like, what does your treatment journey together look like?
It's not linear. It's not overnight. But I meet with folks on a weekly basis, and they come in literally, like, I have them come at the same time. It's not just even for scheduling purposes. It's like, there's even something about our psyches knowing, like, okay, on Tuesday at 2 p.m., like, I get care. And I might push against it. I might not like it. And so there's something just about coming together, like, finding that rhythm. And so we talk through what's happening literally in the week, and also what are the stories that are coming up. Like, when you find yourself binging, what's happening? Like, where's, like, and exploring loneliness, or exploring how do I, like, these ideas of disconnection. And so it's kind of this, again, what's happening in the literal present moment. What's it like to literally put food in? What are the sensory sensations? And also kind of backing up and looking at, like, what were your parents' relationship with food? What did you learn? And so it's this long process. And also within that is, is with eating disorders, it's a team approach. So bringing in dietitians and nutritionists, even sometimes like body therapy to just help them even come back to their body. And, doctors, because we want to make sure weight's okay, and like it's a dangerous illness. And so there's definitely like a team approach, just to care for all parts of the body.
Yeah. Oh, I love that. When people see you, like you said, it's weekly, definitely at the beginning, when that consistency. How long do people work with you for, whether they're coming for eating disorders or trauma work or anxiety, roughly? And I know there's no cookie cutter answer, but just for our listeners to get a time frame, because it really is, it's not overnight and it's different for everybody. But what do you say you often see?
I see people probably for a year or two, and sometimes longer, sometimes shorter, but generally there's like a sweet spot. Like I think like it takes about, there's like something that happens in this 3 to 4 month of just like getting used to it, getting in the rhythm, starting to drop into the work. And then there's something at this 4-month mark that it's like people really commit and like come in, and it's familiar, so it's not scary, so you can really go to those places. And so there's something really beautiful that happens. And then after about like a year or two, there's just a like natural kind of emerging of like, we have done the work that we needed to do, and I think it's time for you to go, or for us to shift. And there's really an impetus of, I'm a big fan of like, you don't need to be in crisis to go to therapy. Like sometimes it's just caring for you as a human. So it's definitely, at least how I work, is long-term, which is so fun and a big privilege to get people, to see people change and shift. Like you see people get married, you see people leave marriages, have babies, all sorts of things, heal. I mean, new jobs, new career, friendship endings, friendship beginnings, moving, all sorts of stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so trauma, eating disorders, are there other areas that you really love to work in as well?
Yeah. So I do a lot of friendship work as well. So it kind of happened. It was like a happy accident of just realizing people, especially in 20s, 30s, 40s, and coming out of the pandemic, there's a lot of sense of disconnection. People have moved. I mean, I feel kindred to that. And this idea of, bless you.
Thank you.
Of like, how do I make friends? Wait, I have these friends. And even so much of therapy is changing and healing. And so like your friendships are going to change when you really commit to this work. And so that's even a part of the grief of like, wait, this friendship, or even this friend group that used to fit so seamlessly and it was so easy to be in, is not so easy because our values have changed. I want different things. And I still love them, but I don't feel good being with them. Like, what do I do there? So and I just think creating more language around friendships, because we have so many resources around like the relationships we have with our partner, with our family of origin, that our friendships are just as important and serve really pivotal roles, especially for our mental health and for our well-being. So, yeah.
So what type of work do you do
with friendships?
Yeah. What does that look like?
I think it looks like even just relearning some things of what's it mean to be a friend, looking at how to implement like conflict. I think that that's a big misnomer. It's like best friends don't fight. And coming to this place of like, well, actually conflicts can be, I would say of my friendship work, like kind of the thesis is that like conflict is actually incredible and can create really good, sustainable friendships where there's actually honesty. And so even the mark of like, even looking at friendships a different way and using this litmus test, like, do I feel like I could tell this person or this friend of mine, like, hey, you hurt my feelings. Like, I really didn't like when you said that. Or oh, I saw this picture on social media and I felt so left out. Like,
Yeah.
even holding space for imagining that and seeing what happens in your body. Like, does your body feel like, okay, that would probably be scary, but I feel like my friend could hold this? Or does my body totally clench up and I can already sense my friend's going to get so defensive?
Yeah.
And just even using those and as like launch marks of like, okay, let's explore more about this friendship. Or looking at, I was just talking with someone yesterday that was sharing about her therapy experience. And she was like, I realized so much of my first therapy was just talking about how I wanted to be such a good friend. And it's such an important value of mine that sometimes I like overdid it. And I would
Yeah.
become almost like overly available and I would never say no and I would never have any limits. So how can I
Yeah.
create more space in my friendships where my no is welcomed?
Yeah. Wow. Boundary work.
Hmm.
Oh, that's so hard
Yes.
and so
Yes.
beautiful in friendships.
Yes. Uh-huh. So
Yeah.
yeah, for
Esther
sure.
Perel, who's one of my absolute favorite therapists, she was bringing in friends like of her
Yes.
clients, especially coming out of the pandemic to hear, just creating that bond of connection more. And I thought, wow, that's really neat. And
Yeah.
oftentimes when I work with couples, it will be, helping one of the partners through something, and it may not necessarily be couples counseling related necessarily, but they'll want the other one to come in just to get a window into their world. And I think that's so beautiful, so healthy. I encourage it. And so I think there's a beautiful space here for friend work in particular, because
Yeah.
even one of my favorite authors, her name is Jenny Allen, and she wrote a book all on this of finding your
Yes.
people. And so it's literally, this is a huge theme coming out of, the last 2 years that we've just had, is that we're really craving connection on a deeper level than before, which
Yeah.
we're created for connection anyway, but especially coming out of this more isolating, high anxiety, unknown, uncertain period of
Mm-hmm.
time. And so that is amazing. I
Yeah.
love that.
Yes. Thank
And
you.
you're working on a friendship game, aren't you? Like a card game?
Yes,
Okay, tell
yes,
us
it's
about
literally
that.
coming. Yeah, I'm literally sent off like the final, I gave like the final seal of approval to the designer today. So it's a big day
Wow.
before it goes off to the
Wow.
printer. But yeah, it's literally for exactly the reasons that you said, is like we need help connecting and creating space to have more language and have these deeper conversations with our friends. And so it's going to be a friendship deck that is going to be 62 questions, and it'll have 3 different levels of descending vulnerability. So even the sense of like, we don't have to go straight to the deep end.
Right.
Like we can ease in, we can
Mhm.
like go toe first, or you can go straight to the deep end. It does not matter. Um, and they're going to be group cards. There's going to be vulnerability cards. So group cards are everyone goes around and answers, and then individuals questions throughout. And they're just going to be like really both fun. So it's going to even look at like, how did you learn about the birds and the bees? Like that is such a fun thing to learn about, how people were taught about that with our friends. Or even questions like, when you get your feelings hurt, do you tell us?
Mm.
Or do you hold it in? Like, how do you need more support? Or how do you, when you have a bad day, like, how do you like to be cared for? And even the deeper, so like
I
the
love
level
that.
3 questions are going to be a lot more here and now.
Mm.
And so what that means is just exploring like, do any of you, have you ever felt like you haven't belonged here?
Mm.
When are, during what conversations do you feel most left out?
Mm.
So just beginning to open like really generous, curious space for friends to have more of those conversations, to come together, because we need our friends. But we also need more resources. And so that's where the deck came from. So yeah, it will be out August 5th is when it will be
Wow.
releasing.
That's
Yeah.
awesome. Where can we get those?
You can get them on my website, blakeblankenbecler.com. So, and I'll probably sell them, in stores eventually, but for
Cool.
now it'll just be, yeah, through my website.
Oh, that's amazing. I love that stuff. Like we host a lot. We have like a beautiful acreage that we host a
Uh,
lot of get-togethers and events here. And I have kids,
My
and they
gosh.
always have their friends over. So we do those. We have on our dinner table, we have literally like conversation starters for family,
Yes.
for friends, for couples, and we do them all the time. And I think people know when they come to our house, like they're going to have fun and we're going to go on ATV rides, but we're going to have heart to hearts maybe too.
Yes. No,
I
it's the
love that
best.
stuff. So
Oh,
I'm definitely going to
amazing.
look into that. I would love something like that. That's so great.
Yes.
I'm so
I'll be
glad that you
sure to
made it.
send your way.
Yeah. Oh, that's amazing. I just love
Uh-huh.
hearing the play that comes out just as you talk, the joy, that kind of lightheartedness
Mm.
that just pervades through trauma work, body image, eating disorder work that you work in. You can tell there's just this innocence about you. You have such a, a light young
Thank
energy too,
you.
being yeah, and it's just so beautiful and joyous. And oh, it's really beautiful, Blake. And I just
Mm.
want to encourage you in that.
Thank you so much, Barb. That really, yeah, that means a lot. It feels, this work is so serious and it's
Mhm.
so hard and it's heartbreaking. And I just, yeah, I feel grateful that there is a sense of like, we do get to laugh and play in this
Yeah,
work too. Like, you still, like, trauma has not taken all of the good
right.
parts of you away. Like, if anything, doing this work helps bring out those beautiful,
Yeah,
endearing, hopeful, joyful parts. So thank you
right.
for naming that. I really appreciate
Yeah.
it.
And we need more play. Like we need to laugh and
Yes.
smile. And it's like,
Ah,
wow, deep in my soul, I feel that. And it's like, it's so refreshing, whether you're just stressed or burnt out, or whether you've experienced trauma, especially childhood trauma, or there's that internal battle and control of eating disorders. Like just that antidote of play is so life-giving. So I love that you create space for that, because a lot of our work, you're right, it's very hard, and it can be very I love just how relational you are too. Like it's not too
oh,
clinical,
thank
or
you.
this is, and there's a
Yeah,
place,
no, that
obviously
doesn't feel
evidence-based
good.
practices are
Sure.
there and all of that
Sure.
in
Yes,
clinical
yes.
training. But I think for me, that's where I see the magic really happen, is healing, and in my own life of just that relationship. And then to be able to add play and laughter and authenticity to it. I mean, there is like no greater antidote to
No,
pain.
it literally gives me chill bumps.
Oh,
It's
I
the
love it.
greatest.
It's so great. So, thank you so much for coming on in beautiful South Carolina. That's
Yes.
amazing. And we really look forward to finding your friendship cards. And where else can our listeners kind of follow along with you and see you? You said your website. Where else?
Yeah, website. And then I'm on Instagram. It's just my
Okay.
name on Instagram, and then my name on TikTok. It's funny
Okay.
to be on TikTok these days with all the, yeah, young
Right.
cool kids. But
Right.
yes, that's where I hang out these days.
Awesome. Oh, very cool.
Yes.
Oh, well, Blake, thank you
Thank you
so
so
much for your
much.
time and coming on, and have a wonderful week. And we look forward
Yes.
to learning more about you too through the friendship game and seeing what that's like. We'll have to have you on again once it's out and do some of the questions and have
Amazing.
our listeners
That
be
would
able
be
to
so
play.
fun.
Yeah.
Yes. Amazing.
Um,
Okay, take care.
okay. Bye bye.
Bye.